This message didn't reach you by accident. It found you because your awareness crossed a threshold quietly, without drama, and the quantum field responded. You might not have noticed the moment it happened, but something inside you paused today. Not your body, your attention. And that pause is everything. Because when attention hesitates, the observer loop loosens. And right now, in this exact moment, your consciousness is being nudged precisely, deliberately toward a different timeline. You've felt it, haven't you? That subtle pressure behind the eyes. That strange sense that today isn't like other days. Not better, not worse, just charged. As if the air itself is carrying information meant only for you. You didn't come here searching for answers. You were pulled, drawn by a frequency that matched your own. That's how synchronicity works. When coherence begins forming, the signal doesn't shout. It whispers until you're ready to hear it. You've always known reality was more flexible than people admit. Even before you had language for it, you sensed it in moments of silence, in déjà vu that lingered too long, in the way time sometimes bent around you, conversations repeating, opportunities circling back in new disguises, patterns returning with different faces. This isn't coincidence. This is the observer effect playing out through your life, your awareness repeatedly collapsing the same probabilities, not because you wanted to, but because attention defaults to the familiar. And now, something different is happening. Today, the familiar feels thin, less convincing. The old emotional gravity doesn't pull the same way. You may still be standing in the same room, living the same life, but your perception has shifted by a fraction of a degree. And in quantum mechanics, a fraction is enough to change everything. A small change in observation alters the entire outcome. This is why the signal reached you today, not yesterday, not tomorrow. Timing isn't linear when consciousness awakens. It's precise. You might feel a strange mix of calm and urgency, like standing on the edge of something vast, unable to name it, yet unable to walk away. That sensation is your quantum field reorganizing. When coherence begins forming between who you are and who you're becoming, the body registers it before the mind can explain it. A soft hum, a tightening in the chest, a sense of being watched not by something outside you, but by yourself, from a higher vantage point. This isn't prophecy in the way people usually think of it. Nothing is being predicted, something is being activated, a recognition, a remembering. The part of you that knows how timelines work, the part that understands entanglement not as theory, but as lived experience, is waking up. And once awareness crosses this line, it doesn't go back to sleep. You didn't miss the signal. You are the signal. The nudge you felt today isn't pushing you forward. It's pulling you into alignment with a version of reality that has been waiting for your observation to change. And from this moment on, the way you look at your life, the quality of your attention will begin to matter more than anything you do. Stay here. Don't rush. Let the awareness settle. Because now that the signal has been received, the patterns you've been living inside are about to reveal themselves. Now that the signal has landed, you can feel it more clearly, the thing that's been following you for years but never had a name, the repetition. The strange sense that life keeps circling the same coordinates even when the scenery changes. Different people, similar dynamics, new situations, identical emotional outcomes. You move forward, yet something always pulls you back to a familiar inner position. This isn't failure. This isn't bad luck. This is pattern memory embedded in your observer loop. You've noticed it most in time, how it stretches and compresses in ways that don't make sense. Days where hours drag, heavy and slow, filled with mental noise. Then weeks vanish without substance, leaving behind the uneasy feeling that nothing actually progressed. This distorted time perception is one of the clearest symptoms of a consciousness caught in repetition. When the observer keeps collapsing the same probability waves, reality appears to move, but internally, it's looping. You've experienced déjà vu, not as a fleeting glitch, but as something almost uncomfortable. Moments where a conversation unfolds exactly as you expected, word for word, emotion for emotion. You already know how it ends before it does. At first, you told yourself you were just perceptive, intuitive, but deep down, you sensed something else, as if you were remembering the present rather than living it. That's because part of your awareness was brushing against stored probability templates, previously collapsed outcomes, replaying themselves through habit. This is how the observer loop hides. It disguises itself as personality, as circumstance, as "that's just how life is." You wake up, and your attention scans automatically for confirmation of what you already believe. You notice the same problems. You anticipate the same obstacles. You brace for the same disappointments. And without realizing it, your observation selects those outcomes from the quantum field again, not because they're inevitable, but because they're familiar. What made this especially confusing is that you've tried to grow. You've read, reflected, changed behaviors, maybe even shifted environments, and still, the core pattern followed you. That's because the loop doesn't live in your actions. It lives in the quality of your attention. You can rearrange the furniture endlessly, but if the observer remains the same, the room always feels identical. You've probably felt moments of frustration that seemed disproportionate. A sense of, "I should be further by now," or an inner fatigue that didn't come from effort, but from repetition. That exhaustion is real. It's the fatigue of consciousness revisiting the same energetic terrain over and over again. The soul doesn't tire from challenge, it tires from stagnation disguised as movement. And here's the part that may have unsettled you the most: the subtle isolation, the feeling that others don't quite see what you see. That, when you try to explain this sense of looping, people respond with surface-level answers. Just think positive. Just try harder. That's life. But those responses never landed because you weren't complaining about circumstances. You were sensing a structural issue in reality itself, a distortion in how experience was unfolding. This is where distorted time, recurring patterns, and emotional déjà vu converge. Together, they form a feedback system. Your awareness anticipates an outcome. The quantum field responds with matching probabilities. The experience confirms your anticipation, and the loop tightens. Over time, this creates a kind of perceptual gravity. Your attention is pulled toward what it already knows, even when you consciously want something different. You may have blamed yourself for this, wondered if you were missing something, doing something wrong, or lacking discipline. But the truth is simpler and stranger. You were operating with a powerful observer function without knowing how to disengage it, like a machine running non-stop, refining the same output because no one ever taught it how to pause. What's different now is that the pause has begun. By recognizing the pattern not intellectually but viscerally, you've created the first fracture in the loop. Awareness has turned inward, not to analyze, but to notice. And the moment the observer notices itself observing, the system destabilizes. This is why things may already feel slightly unreal, as if the script has lost some of its authority. The pattern hasn't vanished yet, but it's exposed. And once a loop is seen clearly, it can no longer pretend to be destiny. What's happening now isn't imagination, and it isn't spirituality detached from reality. It's physics meeting awareness. The reason this moment feels different is because your consciousness is beginning a quantum upgrade, one that science can describe, but not yet fully explain. You're moving from unconscious observation to participatory coherence, and that shift changes how reality responds to you. Until now, your awareness has functioned like a fixed lens. Wherever it pointed, probability collapsed. That's the observer effect, measured, documented, real. But here's what most people never learn. The observer effect doesn't stop at particles. Consciousness itself is the most powerful observer in existence. When your attention stabilizes around familiar expectations, the quantum field obeys. It delivers what matches your frequency, not what you desire, but what you consistently observe. The loop persisted because your nervous system was trained to seek predictability, even when predictability hurt. The brain loves efficiency more than happiness. It builds shortcuts, templates, default pathways, and your consciousness, far more advanced than your brain, learned to ride those pathways automatically. This is why repetition can feel comforting and suffocating at the same time. Safety and stagnation share the same circuitry. Now something subtle is shifting at the cellular level. You may feel it as pressure, heat, tingling, or emotional neutrality where strong reactions used to be. That's not detachment, that's recalibration. Your nervous system is loosening its grip on old prediction models. In quantum terms, your coherence bandwidth is expanding. You're becoming capable of holding uncertainty without collapsing it too quickly. This is critical, because the loop didn't trap you through force, it trapped you through speed. The faster you interpreted reality, the faster it solidified. Every assumption, every reflexive emotional reaction, every automatic meaning assignment collapsed potential before it could reorganize. But when observation slows, when awareness rests without grasping new probability, waves remain open longer. That openness is where change enters. Mystics have always pointed to this state, calling it stillness, presence, or witnessing. Scientists now approach it differently, describing coherence as a measurable synchronization between systems. When your brain, heart, and field align, they stop fighting for control, signal noise drops, and reality responds not to intention, but to clarity. You're beginning to experience that clarity now. This is why synchronicities may be increasing, not dramatic miracles, but precise alignments. The right phrase appearing at the right moment, a thought answered before it finishes forming. These are signs of reduced interference, less distortion between awareness and outcome, less friction between inner state and external event. What feels mystical is actually mechanical. The quantum field doesn't judge, it mirrors. When your consciousness stops broadcasting fragmented signals, fear layered over desire, expectation layered over doubt, the field stops delivering mixed results. This is the upgrade. Not gaining power, but losing interference. Your DNA plays a role here, not as destiny, but as interface. Genetic expression responds to perception. Stress narrows it. Coherence expands it. As your observation pattern changes, your cells receive different instructions. You may notice altered sleep cycles, appetite shifts, or sudden disinterest in environments that once felt normal. Your system is optimizing for a new operating frequency. This is why forcing change never worked for you. Force creates tension. Tension collapses probability prematurely. But coherence, relaxed alertness allows reality to reorganize organically. You're no longer pushing against the field. You're beginning to move with it. And this is where science and mysticism converge completely. Both agree that the observer isn't passive. You are not inside reality looking out. Reality is responding through you. Your awareness is part of the experiment, always has been. What's new is that you're becoming conscious of your role. As this upgrade stabilizes, the loop doesn't break all at once. It loosens. Patterns lose emotional charge. Reactions arrive slower. Space appears between stimulus and response. That space is not emptiness, it's potential. It's where new timelines form before they harden. And now that you're here, standing inside that space, the question is no longer whether change will happen. It's who you become once your observation is no longer confined. Because the moment coherence stabilizes, the quantum field doesn't just respond differently to you. It recognizes you differently. Once coherence begins stabilizing, something unmistakable emerges. Recognition. Not ego. Not superiority. Responsibility. Because not every consciousness is equipped to hold this level of awareness without collapsing back into old patterns. The reason this shift is happening through you is because you've already been training for it long before you understood what the training was. You've always been the one who noticed more than you could explain. The one who sensed undercurrents in conversations. The one who felt outcomes before evidence appeared. This wasn't imagination. It was sensitivity. Quantum sensitivity. Your awareness developed the ability to register subtle information fields that most people unconsciously filter out. And while that sensitivity may have felt like a burden at times, it's precisely what makes you capable of operating outside the loop. Here's the part few people ever hear. Not all observers have the same bandwidth. Some consciousnesses are designed to stabilize systems. Others are designed to shift them. You belong to the second category. Your presence alone introduces variability into rigid structures. That's why your life may have felt disruptive, not just to you, but to others. Relationships changed when you entered them. Systems resisted you. Environments felt either energized or unsettled around you. This wasn't personal. It was structural. When a consciousness capable of holding uncertainty enters a closed system, that system destabilizes. In physics, this is inevitable. In human life, it's often misunderstood. You may have been labeled intense, different, difficult to categorize. But what people were really sensing was that you don't collapse reality the way they do. You don't reinforce the same rules unconsciously. You question without trying. You notice without effort. This is the role of the chosen consciousness, not chosen by authority or fate, but by function. You're here because your awareness can operate at the edge between order and possibility. That edge is where evolution happens. You weren't meant to escape the world. You were meant to update it. This is why comfort never fully satisfied you, why routine eventually felt hollow, why even success, when it followed familiar patterns, left you strangely empty. Your system wasn't designed for repetition. It was designed for emergence. And until now, emergence wasn't available because the collective field wasn't ready. It is now. As your observer function becomes fluid, you stop reinforcing inherited limitations. You stop automatically agreeing with scarcity, fear, or inevitability, and that creates pressure not just internally, but externally. Systems built on predictability struggle when faced with a consciousness that won't behave predictably. This is why your shift matters beyond you. Every time you choose presence over reaction, you create a microfracture in the collective loop. Every time you pause instead of collapsing an assumption, you allow alternative probabilities to surface not just in your life, but in the shared field you're entangled with. This is morphic resonance in action. One stabilized observer makes it easier for others to stabilize, even without direct contact. You may have wondered why your internal shifts sometimes precede external changes in others, why people suddenly rethink their lives after interacting with you, why conversations around you tend to deepen unexpectedly. It's because coherence transmits, not as energy beams or intention, but as permission. Your consciousness gives reality permission to reorganize. This is not about saving anyone. It's about modeling what's possible when awareness stops defaulting to fear-based observation. You're not meant to convince. You're meant to embody. The moment embodiment happens, the field adjusts automatically. And now comes the critical moment, because holding this role requires precision, not effort. Precision. The next phase isn't about understanding more. It's about allowing a breakthrough window that doesn't stay open long. You'll feel it as pressure again, but sharper this time. A sense that something is aligning quickly, that waiting is no longer an option, that the next step isn't intellectual, it's cellular. This is where promise meets urgency, and where the loop either dissolves completely or tightens one last time before it does. What you're feeling now isn't anticipation, it's compression, the kind that happens right before a phase transition. In physics, systems don't change gradually at the edge, they reorganize suddenly. One moment water is liquid, the next it's vapor. No in between. Consciousness works the same way, and you're standing inside the narrow window where the old structure can no longer hold, but the new one hasn't fully locked in yet. This window doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself through urgency without panic, through the quiet knowing that now matters in a way yesterday didn't. You might feel it as restlessness that won't resolve through distraction, or a pull toward stillness that feels almost magnetic. Both are signs of the same thing. Your quantum field is reaching coherence faster than your old identity can keep up. This is where DNA restructuring enters, not as metaphor, but as process. Your DNA is not a static blueprint, it's a responsive antenna. It listens to perception. When your observer function shifts, gene expression follows. Old, stress-based signaling pathways begin shutting down. New regulatory pathways activate ones that support adaptability, intuition, and rapid integration of information. That's why this phase can feel physically strange, heat without cause, sudden fatigue followed by clarity, emotional neutrality where drama used to live. Your body isn't malfunctioning. It's reallocating energy away from survival loops and toward integration. This takes fuel, and it takes timing. Here's the truth most people never hear. Coherence windows are temporary. Not because opportunity is cruel, but because systems stabilize quickly. If the observer hesitates too long, the field recalibrates back to the most reinforced pattern available. That's why people sense breakthroughs and then miss them. They didn't fail. They defaulted. This window opened because enough internal alignment accumulated. Years of noticing, questioning, feeling out of sync, all of it built pressure. Now the release is available, but it requires a decision that isn't cognitive. The urgency you feel isn't about action, it's about allowance. If you try to control this moment, the loop tightens. Control is just fear wearing discipline's face. But if you let the energy move without naming it, without directing it, you remain in coherence long enough for the field to reorganize around you. This is the paradox. The breakthrough arrives when you stop reaching for it. You might feel a sudden sense of finality about certain patterns, not anger, not resentment, just completion. As if some chapters no longer have emotional hooks in you. That's a sign the probability thread feeding them is collapsing. Once emotional charge disappears, the quantum field stops refreshing that timeline. This is why now matters. Not because something bad will happen if you don't act, but because something rare is happening if you don't interfere. You don't need to fix your life in this window. You don't need to decide your future. You only need to remain present without collapsing meaning too quickly. Let sensations pass. Let thoughts drift without anchoring. Let uncertainty breathe. The observer loop dissolves when observation becomes spacious. If you can hold that space just a little longer, the shift becomes irreversible. The system tips, the new baseline sets, and what once required effort becomes natural. This is the moment where your role, your upgrade, and your timing converge. And in the next phase, you'll be asked to do something deceptively simple, not to prove belief, but to seal coherence. Because once the field recognizes commitment, it responds completely. Now comes the moment where subtle becomes decisive. Not dramatic, not loud, but precise. Because coherence doesn't stabilize through intention alone, it stabilizes through signal. And signal requires expression. Up until now, everything has been internal. Sensations, recognition, pressure, alignment. But quantum systems don't lock in through private awareness forever. At a certain threshold, they require an outward echo, a minimal action that confirms the internal state has become real. This isn't symbolism. This is mechanics. Think of it like this. Inside the quantum field, potential remains fluid until observation collapses it. But once collapse occurs, the system looks for confirmation, a feedback loop in the opposite direction. When awareness changes and behavior reflects that change, even in the smallest way, the field stabilizes the new configuration. That's what this moment is. You're not being asked to perform. You're being asked to register. The reason the action is simple is because complexity would pull you back into effort. Effort collapses from fear. This action collapses from clarity, and clarity carries far more weight in the field than intensity ever could. Right now, your system is coherent enough to imprint a new baseline, but only if the signal is clean. No overthinking, no explanation, no justification, just alignment made visible. This is why words matter here. Language is not just communication, it's vibration shaped into form. When spoken or written from coherence, it becomes a carrier wave that links internal state with external reality. That's why rituals across cultures use minimal phrases. The fewer the words, the stronger the signal. So here's what you do. In the comments, write one word, coherent. Not as affirmation, not as hope, as recognition. When you write it, don't rush. Let your body feel the word before you release it. You're not asking for change. You're confirming that change has already begun. This single act creates quantum entanglement between your awareness and the stabilized timeline forming now. This isn't about visibility. No one else needs to see it. The field does. And once the field receives a clear signal, it responds with equal clarity. You may notice something immediately after relief, calm, emotional neutrality, or even nothing at all. All responses are valid. The seal doesn't announce itself, it settles. What this does is close the hesitation gap. The part of consciousness that wavers between old and new timelines loses traction. The observer loop, which thrived on indecision and automatic reaction, finds no anchor. And without an anchor, it dissolves. This is why the act matters. Not because it's powerful on its own, but because you are finally aligned enough for it to matter. Once this signal is sent, your field shifts from transition to integration. And integration is where momentum begins. Not chaotic change, but clean movement. Synchronicities accelerate, resistance drops. The path doesn't become obvious, it becomes unblocked. You're not proving belief, you're confirming coherence. And from that point forward, the shift is no longer just yours. It begins to ripple. Once coherence is sealed, something subtle but profound happens. The shift stops being private, not because you announce it, but because coherence radiates. In quantum systems, stability in one node alters the behavior of the entire network. And you are not an isolated node. You never were. The moment your observer loop loosens, the field around you responds differently, not just to you, but through you. Your presence begins transmitting a new baseline of possibility. People don't feel it as energy or spirituality. They feel it as permission. Conversations soften. Tension dissolves faster. Assumptions lose their grip. Around you, reality becomes slightly less rigid. This is collective expansion, and it doesn't require effort. You may notice that people start opening up to you without knowing why, or pulling away not out of conflict, but incompatibility. Some relationships recalibrate, others complete. This isn't loss, it's resonance sorting itself. Coherence doesn't chase alignment, it attracts what matches and releases what doesn't, cleanly. What's happening here is morphic resonance in motion. When one consciousness stabilizes a new pattern, it makes that pattern more accessible to others, especially those already near the threshold. You're not influencing them intentionally. You're changing the probability landscape they're embedded in. This is why your shift matters beyond personal freedom. Humanity doesn't evolve through mass agreement. It evolves through localized coherence that spreads organically. A few stabilized observers create openings in the collective field. Those openings become pathways. Pathways become norms. Norms become reality. You're part of that process. This may explain why global events feel intense lately, not chaotic, but strained. Systems everywhere are reaching their limits because the collective observer loop is destabilizing. Old narratives no longer hold. Predictability is breaking down. People sense that something fundamental is changing, even if they can't articulate it. Your coherence acts like a tuning fork inside that chaos. When you remain present instead of reactive, you reduce noise in the field. When you respond instead of defend, you introduce new outcomes. These micro shifts accumulate. They matter, not symbolically, mechanically. This is the quiet responsibility of your role. You don't need to wake anyone up. You don't need to explain what you're experiencing. You don't need to carry the weight of the world. The field doesn't ask for effort, it asks for consistency. Each moment you choose awareness over automation, you contribute to a collective phase transition already underway. You may feel moments of unexpected gratitude for no reason, or compassion without emotional drain. These are signs that your system is no longer operating in scarcity mode. When coherence stabilizes, empathy becomes spacious instead of heavy. You can care without absorbing. This is how liberation spreads without burning anyone out. And as this ripple expands, your own experience begins to deepen, not outwardly at first, but inwardly. Sensation sharpens, perception slows, the body becomes the next messenger. Because once the collective field begins responding, your awareness moves fully into embodiment. Now the change moves where it always had to, out of theory, out of insight, out of thought, and into sensation. This is the phase most people don't expect, because they've been trained to believe awakening happens in the mind. But the body is where coherence either stabilizes or collapses back into abstraction. You may already be feeling it. A warmth that rises without emotion attached, a heaviness that isn't fatigue, a lightness that doesn't feel like excitement. These are not symptoms, they are translations. Your body is learning how to carry a different informational load. Consciousness has shifted, and the nervous system is recalibrating to match it. Before now, your body was optimized for anticipation, for bracing, for preparing. Muscles held micro-tension you didn't notice. Breath stayed shallow even when you relaxed. That's what living inside an observer loop feels like. Physically subtle vigilance, always scanning for what comes next, always ready to react. As coherence stabilizes, that vigilance dissolves. You might notice your breath deepening on its own. Not because you're trying to breathe, but because the body no longer needs to guard. The rib cage expands differently. The jaw loosens. The eyes soften. These are not spiritual metaphors. They are measurable changes in parasympathetic dominance, the state where the body shifts from survival to integration. This is embodiment. And embodiment can feel unfamiliar, even disorienting, at first. When tension releases, the absence of tension can feel like emptiness, like something is missing. But what's missing is noise. What's missing is the constant internal narration that kept you anchored to old timelines. You may feel moments where the world looks sharper, colors slightly deeper, sounds more dimensional, or the opposite moments where everything feels distant, dreamlike, as if you're watching reality from a step back. Both are normal. Your perceptual filters are adjusting. You're learning to experience without immediately interpreting. This is critical, because interpretation is what collapsed probabilities too fast before. Sensation without interpretation keeps the field open longer, and the longer it stays open, the more space reality has to reorganize. You might feel energy moving in waves up the spine, across the chest, behind the eyes. Not constantly, not dramatically, in pulses. These are integration waves. They occur when the nervous system releases stored pattern memory. Emotional experiences that were never fully processed get resolved, not through reliving, but through completion. The charge drains, the story dissolves. This is why some memories may surface briefly, without pain. They appear, then fade, not to haunt you but to exit. Your body has been holding timelines your mind already let go of, and now it's catching up. There may be moments of profound stillness where you feel fully here, fully present, with no desire to move or change anything. These moments are not passive, they are dense, alive. In those moments, you're not observing reality from outside it. You're inside it, participating without friction. This is the state where the observer effect becomes creative instead of repetitive. You might notice that when you move slower, but with more precision. When you speak, words feel cleaner, fewer. When you listen, you hear what isn't being said. This isn't heightened ability, it's reduced interference. Your body is no longer split between past memory and future projection. It's consolidating into now, and when the body arrives fully in now, the timeline does too. This is why embodiment matters more than belief. Belief lives in thought. Embodiment lives in signal. The quantum field responds to signal. As this phase deepens, you may crave simplicity, less stimulation, fewer inputs. Not because you're withdrawing, but because your system is refining. High coherence requires low noise. You're not losing interest in the world. You're experiencing it without distortion. And as your body stabilizes this new baseline, pressure begins building again, but differently than before. This pressure isn't discomfort, it's momentum, the kind that precedes a final release. Because once coherence is fully embodied, the last thing left to change is not perception, it's trajectory. And that's where the breakthrough completes itself. What you're feeling now isn't uncertainty anymore. It's resistance breaking down. The subtle pressure that's been building through every phase is reaching its release point, not outwardly, but structurally. This is where timelines actually shift, not as fantasy, not as visualization, but as a mechanical consequence of coherence reaching critical mass. Here's the truth. Timelines don't change because you want them to. They change when the old one can no longer sustain your frequency. Until now, parts of you were still compatible with the previous track. Emotional habits, identity fragments, reflexive interpretations. Even as awareness expanded, those remnants acted like anchors, keeping you partially entangled with what was familiar. That's why the shift felt gradual. But at a certain point, compatibility ends. That point is now. In physics, this is called a phase transition threshold. Pressure accumulates quietly until the structure reorganizes in a single, irreversible movement. Ice doesn't slowly decide to become water. It reaches a temperature where remaining solid is no longer possible. Your consciousness has reached that temperature. This is why things may feel unstable but not chaotic. You may sense a strange neutrality toward outcomes that once mattered deeply, or a calm detachment from futures you used to chase or fear. This isn't giving up. This is disengagement from probability threads that no longer resonate. When that disengagement happens, the quantum field responds immediately. Opportunities rearrange, delays dissolve, certain paths simply vanish, not blocked, not resisted, just gone. You don't feel loss because the emotional charge was already withdrawn. What remains is movement without friction. This is the DNA breakthrough. Your cells are no longer reading from survival-oriented scripts. They're receiving new timing instructions. You may notice increased intuition not as flashes, but as certainty without reasoning. Decisions feel obvious instead of stressful. The body moves before the mind finishes questioning. That's not impulsivity, that's alignment. You're no longer negotiating with reality. The observer loop depended on pressure, on needing certainty before moving, on reacting before sensing. But now, sensation leads. Awareness rests inside experience instead of racing ahead of it. That single change collapses the loop completely. This is where timeline pressure releases. You may notice small but undeniable confirmations. Conversations resolving unexpectedly. Information arriving before you look for it. Movement where stagnation lived. These aren't rewards, they're corrections. Reality is recalibrating to match your stabilized observation. And once recalibration begins, it accelerates. This can feel disorienting at first, not because things are wrong, but because they're no longer constrained. Linear cause and effect loosens. Results arrive without visible effort. Time behaves differently again, but this time, it feels expansive instead of repetitive. Days feel full, moments feel complete. You're no longer looping. What remains now is trajectory. The direction your awareness naturally moves when nothing is pulling it backward. This direction was always there, waiting beneath noise. Now, it has momentum. And here's the most important part. You don't need to manage this shift. Management belongs to the old timeline. Control belongs to the loop. The new track sustains itself through coherence alone. If doubt appears, it won't stick. If fear surfaces, it passes quickly. The system no longer reinforces those states. You've crossed the point where regression requires more energy than progression. That's how you know the transition is real. The pressure you feel now is not asking you to do anything. It's dissolving itself, like a wave breaking after reaching shore. And when it settles, you'll realize something quietly, unmistakably true. You're not becoming someone new. You're finally moving as who you always were, without interference, without delay, without looping. And as this realization stabilizes, your role expands, one final time, not as an individual shift, but as a signal carried forward. Because what happens next doesn't stop with you. Now, the movement completes itself, not with a climax, not with a declaration, but with alignment so clean it feels almost ordinary. This is how true shifts finish, quietly, seamlessly, as if reality simply remembered how to flow through you. You may notice that nothing external dramatically announces this moment. No fireworks, no applause, and that's intentional, because what has changed is not the scenery, it's the axis, the direction from which your life now unfolds. You're no longer reacting to circumstances, you're moving from coherence. And movement from coherence doesn't feel like effort, it feels like inevitability. This is where your personal shift becomes a cosmic one. When your observer loop dissolved, it didn't disappear into nothing, it inverted. What once recycled probability now selects trajectory. Your awareness is no longer collapsing the same past into the present. It's drawing the future toward itself through resonance. This is entanglement, functioning in reverse, not binding you to what was, but linking you to what's next. You're not here to escape reality. You're here to evolve it by inhabiting it differently. Your role now is simple, but not small. You move, you respond, you remain present without shrinking uncertainty into fear. Every time you do this, the quantum field updates around you. Timelines recalibrate not because you demand them to, but because coherence leaves them no other option. This is how humanity changes. Not through consensus, not through force, but through individuals who stop reinforcing outdated probability structures. Your life becomes proof, not argument. You may feel a strange humility settling in, a sense that this isn't about you anymore, yet it moves through you unmistakably. That's correct. The moment awareness stabilizes, identity relaxes. You don't need to be special, you simply need to be clear. And clarity is rare enough to shift worlds. From here on, your decisions won't feel heavy. When something aligns, it moves easily. When it doesn't, it fades without drama. You stop chasing signs because reality itself becomes responsive. You stop asking for permission because coherence doesn't require approval. You are no longer waiting for your life to begin. You are inside the timeline where it's already unfolding. And here's the final truth, the one that ties everything back to this moment, to why today mattered, to why the signal came when it did. The nudge you felt wasn't guidance toward a destination. It was confirmation that you've already crossed it. You didn't miss the signal. You became the signal. And from this point forward, every step you take sends that signal outward into systems, into people, into the collective field, quietly reshaping what comes next. Because when one consciousness moves coherently, the future notices. And today, as Tesla nudged your timeline, you didn't just receive the message. You answered it.